What's it like at 16, effectively signing up your life for several years and committing to the army?
Pretty similar to actually starting a business. It's just sheer naivety. How much money do you need to get a food business off the ground successfully? Bloody hell, is that how much money you need? I'm not a natural entrepreneur. I wasn't selling sweets in the playground. I'm not like an Alan Sugar type guy. I'm not particularly motivated by money.
Truth be told, I was in the private equity industry. We didn't really read the business plan. We read the people.
More Toddler Meals in a nutshell are freeze-dried meals for young kids. Quite a novel way to preserve food. No one else is doing dry toddler meals in the UK, but it's still fairly unknown. I think that's one of the challenges I've sort of found is how do you communicate freeze-drying? People are like, well, hold on, is it a frozen product? Is it a dry product? I don't really get it.
What I love about the story is that you found a thread and you just pulled on it and you just kept pulling on it.
Center of any business surely has to be, is there a problem and is your solution good enough to fit that problem? Success is now, like I've got 2 wonderful kids, I've got a lovely, brilliant wife, got a happy family. That is success.
To those listening out there that want to understand how do I generate a business idea, this is literally 101.
I'll say to anybody who's thinking about this sort of path in life, go into it with your eyes wide open.
Welcome everyone to another episode of Everyday Empires. I have the incredible Edward van der Lande here, the founder of More Toddler Meals and a former British Army major. So we're going to get into some very exciting topics here today. Welcome to the show, Ed.
Hi, Rohit. Yeah, thank you so much for letting me come down and come and have a chat.
Yeah, I appreciate it.
great
And
to be here.
we should say for full disclosure, if you hear any interesting noises, there is Ed's wonderful son in the corner playing with blocks. So if that's not a relatable feature of being a business owner, I don't know what is.
The juggle is real over the summer holidays, isn't it? So
Absolutely. But let's jump right in because we've got a really interesting element to your story, which is around you being in the army and then shifting to business ownership. Let's jump into that story. So why did you join the army and why did you leave?
yeah, really good questions, right? So I think trailing back. So I grew up in a military family. So the old man did a full career. So the army was always sort of an area of interest. Truthfully, I always thought I was going to be a doctor.
Ah,
So one of my earliest thoughts is, yeah, the parents asked us what we're going to do with our lives or whatever. We're, I don't know, 8 years old, pretty much a little bit older than Harry is now. I was like, I'm going to be a doctor. So I didn't sort of discounted the army. And then as I sort of hit sort of like 13, 14, quite like the outdoors, and saw, what the old man had been up to. And then there was the opportunity when I was 16 to apply to be an army officer on a whatever scholarship program. So I was like, I'll just give it a punt, and managed to pass that sort of selection when I was 16. So then I knew I was right. That's it. I was committed to the army, and so sort of finished school, went to university, and then started Sandhurst back in September 2013.
okay.
We spent a year doing your basic training, and then fast forward about 11 years, we can perhaps get into some of that later, but 11 years later, sort of realised that with a young family, the pressures that military life puts in it, as well as, I had a brilliant time in the military. Like, it's honestly, it's a phenomenal organisation, but I think I was ready for a new sort of challenge and being a bit more sort of stable at home, I guess. Having sort of seen the impact of military life has on sort of family dynamics. Nothing crazy at all. I don't want to over egg it, but you can sort of see the sort of the pressures that it puts on.
Let's touch in on that. So
Mm.
so because you face similar pressures, right, about being overseas and sort of spending time away from home, and and your lovely wife managing the kids, and I think probably being pregnant, and you're not there for some of those moments. So it's a challenging sort of life moments for anyone. So it's extremely relatable. I'm sure there are plenty of people that can appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I was born in February.
Mm,
3 days later, and I'm number 3 of 4, so I'm all fairly close in age.
mm.
3 days later, Dad gets deployed to the Gulf for the first Gulf War, and so my poor mum is there,
Yeah,
like a newborn, like 2 toddlers, just like brilliant.
yeah.
And the worst thing is, I think I was born on a Saturday. I think his actual call up was on the Monday, I think. So he goes away, and then obviously the Royal Air Force, in all their amazingness, got the flights wrong, so then he had to come back home for like another 24 hours and then go back out. So my poor mum is going to be in absolute turmoil
Yeah.
at that point, and just go, just leave me to it, just get out of here. But yeah, and then when I was sort of deployed, I only sort of did only one sort of serious overseas deployment. But yeah, my wife was pregnant at the time with our second. Harry was a toddler. Wife's also working full time, and yeah, she's a really tough cookie. But seeing the impact that had on her, brought back some of those memories, mostly from
Yeah.
a different place when I was a child versus being a parent and a husband now. But it certainly it brought it all too much into focus. And I thought that was the point really, that you gotta make a decision which way you're gonna go. And as much as I
Mm.
love the army, I think it really brought to the forward just a change of priorities at that point.
You touched on some quite amazing things going into the army, so
Mm.
let's touch on those, and then we'll go into the entrepreneurship. But you mentioned scholarship at 16, Sandhurst, and university. What's it like going through such a difficult thing at 16 and effectively signing up your life for several years and committing to the army at such a young age?
I think at 16, I think probably similar to actually starting a business, it's just sheer naivety.
Yeah.
I think so. No, to be fair to the old man, I think he was very good at making it, letting it be my own decision. So he
Right.
wasn't forcing it. It wasn't like you will join the army. It was very much my own decision. So whilst I think he was quietly supportive of it, it was not like you will join the army and this is what you're going to go and do. So, but I think I was probably quite a serious child. And I've always quite keen to kind of put myself out there, and if there's an opportunity to try something and do, I don't know, just go and throw my hat into the ring and see what happens. But I remember I did actually read my I've managed to find my scholarship report, and it's only over a 2-day period. It's quite crazy, really. You do 2 days, and that's basically determines whether you're going to join the army or not.
Wow.
And the first day, I think, was decidedly underwhelming. They were like very quiet, didn't really do much, and then second day, I think I sort of shone a bit more and did enough to pass. So that was it, really.
Yeah. As I love your humble nature, Ed, because it just did enough to pass to get a scholarship at Sandhurst is sort of it's one of the most prestigious things in the world to get into. So fair play to
Perhaps, yeah.
you.
I think I'll let the people I served with judge on my performance, but yeah, but and then join the army. I was definitely ready at that point. With
Mm.
sort of through university, had frantically watching videos about Afghanistan and what the army had been up to there, and
So this was sort of early 2000s then
yeah, so there's
you
2010, 2013 when I was at university, and the Afghan campaign was hotting up quite a lot, and you see the videos from what people are up to. You see the news, and there's another fatality on a fairly regular basis. So I think I was definitely alive to the realities of it. Yeah, and that's something that appealed to be candid. Like a lot of that appealed, just the challenge of it, the am I good enough type those sort of questions. And I thought the ultimate test of, it's a really bizarre thing to think anyway, but the ultimate test of my sort of own inner credibility is like, would I perform in combat? Now, unfortunately, I never got that chance to, or fortunately, depending on your perspective, but I never deployed to Afghanistan. The campaign was closing as I finished my training and started my early army career. But I guess it certainly revealed a desire to sort of test myself, push myself, and trying to find some level of potential, I think.
and those elements that you touch on are so transferable to being a business owner. So we can get into sort of the business idea and what exactly More
Mm.
Toddler Meals does, but let's touch on some of those transferable. We call them transferable skills, such an awful term, isn't it? But some of the skill sets that you must have built or that you had as being part of that kind of setup must have been transferred over.
Yeah, I think the obvious one is resilience.
Mm.
And I sort of think back to a few years into my army career. I then served with a unit called the Pathfinders, who are quite some people call it an elite unit. I'm not a huge fan of the word elite, but it's a specialist role, and it requires a sort of 6-week selection course to get through, which is both sort of physically and mentally pretty tough. And there's one particular assessment you do, which is called endurance. So it's about it's sort of 24 hours with a heavy backpack on over the Brecon beacons, and you've got to complete the route in the required time. And you've already done quite a few marches before then, so you're already feeling pretty tired. But that is all about just one foot in front of the other. Keep looking after yourself. Stay disciplined. Make sure obviously you're navigating the right way, but you're fueling yourself with a. And I always, in the back of my mind, I do apply that a little bit to running this business. Like, put one foot in front of the other. If you're having a low day or whatever, as long as you're doing something to progress the business, then that's okay. Obviously, can't go like that forever. You've got to do some. But on those lower moments, just make sure you're doing something to keep going forward. So I think resilience is certainly one of them. I think having a sense of humour, I think always helps, because the military is brilliant. You're in weird and wonderful places, having a bit of a rough time, but you're there with your mates, broadly speaking. And just have that sort of dark humour, just like, this is ridiculous. Like, I'm literally sat in a hole here. I've been in a hole for about 10 days now. This is getting a bit, but that sort of like dark humor just to help you kind of get through it. And I think having a bit of humor when it comes to business life as well is quite helpful, because it just, it's an enormous privilege to be able to given the opportunity to try and get a business off the ground. It's also completely mad when you think about it. So just having a bit of humor about it as well, and a bit of perspective, I think, is really helpful. So I think, yeah, resilience, humor in brackets, perspective, I think is probably the two things I've
Yeah.
taken forward.
The one thing that you think of when it comes to sort of people that have been part of the military setup is that resilience, but it's also that discipline to kind of get up and do things on time and kind of hold your word. I'm going to do this, so I'll do that. And it brings back. We were actually talking about this before the show. A gentleman called Jordan who ran a very successful electrician's
Mm.
business, and I asked him on the show, why did you become successful? Like, why did you get all these big jobs, and how did you progress to turning over millions? And he simply said, "I'm just actually quite a nice guy, and I did what I said. I said I'd turn up on this day, and we'll do the job by then. So that's what I did." Um, do you find that kind of frankness and competition in business ownership sort of analogous to being in the army, where you sort of go, right, you got to be here at 0600, you've got to deliver your product by whatever certain day? Do you find that any kind of analogy there, or do you just go, actually, it's a completely different world?
No, I think you're completely right, to Andre. And I think, and I completely align with what Jordan was saying. I think from a discipline perspective, you have to have that discipline and accountability. Otherwise, you're going to fall apart. So I try and set myself, my plan for the day. If we're going to do something, I'll do it. And even those lower moments, it's like, for example, I'm not a huge fan of putting myself out on social media, but I know on a Wednesday I need to do something, a founder-led video, and so I will just get up and do it and try and do it as well as I can. Another thing I sort of try and put in place is in the military. Normally, I do sort of morning PT, so do some level of exercise each morning. So I'm trying to keep in that sort of good habit of keeping sort of physically fit, because I think
Mm,
it just helps to get the endorphins going, helps like my creative bit, but also just keeps me a bit more sort of grounded. So no, I think it's 100% relatable. Because if you're not accountable to yourself, then you are really a bit screwed, to be honest. Because
yeah,
and then I think that's just delivering for customers. Like if you're going to say you're going to do something, you have to do it. Otherwise, you've just eroded that bit of trust. Yeah. So I think discipline and accountability, yeah, as applicable in the military, is equally applicable in business. And I think that's those foundations that I like to think, we'll see, time will tell,
yeah.
to be successful.
What was it like to sort of? I know you mentioned didn't necessarily go out on sort of active tour, but still, you had some, I'm sure, some hairy moments, some interesting stories. What was it like, sort of comparing the two? Is it sort of you prefer the quietness of an office space and meetings, or did you like being outdoors and sort of? I don't think bullets were flying over your head, but maybe something similar.
uh, yeah, I think I'm an outdoors guy. I'm quite an active guy. Um, that's the one thing, I do sort of struggle with a little bit, to sat in my little home office by myself every day, so I'm on the laptop. So that's why I need to do exercise, to kind of get out there and just kind of get the body moving. But it's also, that's try and put like, if I can, most weeks to try and get out and do something, whether that's, coming out to this, or going, trying to flog some meals into shops, or just going to an event or whatever. So try and get myself out there. So I'm definitely more of an outdoors guy. I think I'm a relationships guy as well. I think the areas of the army where I worked were very much sort of small team focused. And so building up those relationships with, admittedly, your subordinates, to be formal about it, your soldiers, but it's a very different relationship from, if you're literally sat in a hole with three guys for 10 days, then the boundaries are going to get pretty blurred at some point, particularly if you need the loo.
It's a
So
bonding
yeah,
experience.
it's definitely a bonding experience. So building up those relationships, I think, is brilliant. That's why I love. That's what one of the things I actually really enjoy about business. I'm trying to take this forward, is actually building up those relationships, whether that's supply, my own sort of supply base, and I'm so lucky to be well supported by my manufacturers, and building up those relationships. But then also, where we're trying to sell it into, like the shop owners, the retail outlets, our end customer, like trying to build up some level of relationship that's more than just transactional. Here's my product. Will you buy my product? It
Mm,
means a lot more to it than that, I think. So as I try and grow this business, I think that's what kind of gets me really excited, to actually build up really proper, obviously they're commercial relationships, but I think you can have a really good, strong relationship with people, and
yeah,
being a people person as well. It's just, as Jordan said, like just being a nice guy,
yeah,
like
it
it actually
works.
helps quite a lot, I think. Just so so all these things sort of weave together, I think, from military to business.
Yeah, it's such a natural step. And likability is such an important point. I don't think one of the most common things I advise clients when they talk about, oh, my sales are a bit low, and I'm a bit stressed and I'm sort of worried about, cash flow and all the rest of it. And I said, well, that's fine. Every business owner goes through that. But if you translate that to the market, to the world, they'll feel that as well.
Mm.
But if you're a bit more likable, a bit funny, a bit sort of disciplined about what you do, actually, do you know what? That goes a very, very long way. And I'm sure you might recall people in your network. Some of the people that I think of straight away are the people that have a bit of something about them,
Yeah.
and they're nice people to work with. But we've mentioned this product before. We've mentioned More Toddler Meals.
Yes.
I guess the audience is itching to know what the hell is More Toddler Meals.
That is a very good question. The More Toddler Meals in a nutshell are freeze-dried meals for young kids aged 10 months to 4 years. So as a freeze-dried product, quite a novel way to preserve food. No one else is doing dry toddler meals in the UK. So freeze-drying itself is when you freeze something, as it says, and then you dry it, and you dry it in a vacuum. So and it's very gentle heat, goes into about 60 degrees. Because it's in a vacuum, the ice crystals in the food sublimate, so they just go straight from ice to vapor. So you don't go through ice, water, vapor, and it means it retains a lot more of the integrity of the original food, depending on how you assess it. But if you put in, I think the most commonly cited one, if you put in like raw apple and freeze dry raw apple, then about 97% of its nutrients will be retained by the end of it. So
Wow.
all your microvitamins, or as well as your macros, clearly, which are slightly more heat sensitive, so less heat sensitive. Yeah, it's just this brilliant technology. I'd used freeze dried rations when I was in the army. You think you need like healthy and convenient meals when you're in the army. If you're sat in a trench, then and equally as a parent, you're equally in the trenches at times. So it's applicable there. But astronauts take it up to space because it's super lightweight, just needs the water in there, and adventurers when they're going up and down hills. So it's this brilliant sort of technology, and I think it's not very common in the UK, but it's becoming slightly more common. Like when you see freeze-dried fruit in your Special K,
Mm.
in a lot of other breakfast cereals, freeze-dried fruit as a snacking product is becoming more common now. There's a freeze-dried like herb and ingredient brand which is doing really well, which one of the startups. But it's still fairly unknown. I think that's one of the challenges I've sort of found is how do you communicate freeze
Yeah.
drying? Because people are like, well, hold on, is it a frozen product? Is it a dry product? I don't really get it. So that's sort of one of the things that we've sort of been focusing on. But yeah, freeze dried food is basically healthy and convenient is the two tenets of the product.
To those listening out there that want to understand how do I generate a business idea, this is literally 101. Your
Yeah.
army background,
Yeah.
your experience with freeze dry rations, and you've got two wonderful sons.
Hmm.
I forgot to mention a father of two wonderful
Oh
sons.
no,
I
yeah.
did not mention at the start. I'm so
You not
sorry,
see the grey hairs on my
They go well. I've got no hair, so
That's
and you just put all of that little bit together. That's it. So I imagine you looked at your sons and went, oh, I've got to feed them nutritious food, but it's got to be quite convenient. And my poor wife's running around managing everything. I'm trying to run a business and manage everything alongside her. So you can kind of see all that coming together
Hmm.
in what is an executable idea. Do you mind just going into the story of
Hmm.
how did you come up specifically? What was it, like a eureka moment, or did you sit down and kind of pull together, your skill sets and problem areas that you were experiencing? How did you? What was the genesis? What was the seed of More Toddler Meals?
Yes, the spark really came in 2022. So I was deployed overseas to Somalia for 6 months. I became very conscious
Hmm.
being away. The wife is pregnant, working full time. Harry's an 18-month-old. And me being away just a bit more difficult
Yeah.
for the wife to do. So we looked at what's on the market, but a bit underwhelmed by some of the products there. It's not necessarily stuff that we would eat ourselves, so a bit reticent to give it to our kids. But as I said, I'd used dried stuff before. So I then just did a load of research, found a freeze drying company, asked for some samples. So you have a 2-week rest and recuperation break in between of any tour. Those had arrived by the time I got home. It has like some freeze dried green beans and I think there's a couple of other ingredients. Put some water in there, like, oh my God, tastes like a green bean. This is amazing. And then so I was like, okay, I think this is the nub of the idea. So drying, and I'd also done some sort of market research on Facebook groups with parents saying like, hey, what's your perceptions of the market? What do you look for in products? And health and convenience were always the two big things. So I was like, okay, so it's got to be healthy, it's got to be convenient. Then sort of came back to the UK. This was in September 22. I bought a home freeze dryer, got shipped from the States. Started developing some recipes of stuff I could cook my own kids and put it into the dry and see whether it would dry. And then once I was kind of happy with my first recipes, sent those over to just random parents that I found on sort of Facebook groups just to get some feedback.
Mm.
Overall, like some really good feedback. One of the particular recipes, I like, this is terrible, and okay, yeah, fair one. That wasn't probably not the best one. So went completely back to the drawing board and developed into a much better recipe. And that's what sort of slowly grew. So I was like, okay, so there's clearly something in this. Let's just test it again. So I then sort of officially launched my minimal viable product. So good food and terrible packaging. It was in horrible white plastic tubs. I'd done the design myself, but I was like, okay, that's deliberate. Like, if in terrible packaging, will they still buy it? So I went on to Kingston Market, and we sort of sold out on the first day,
Wow.
and had some nice feedback for it. I was like, okay, fine, there's something in this. Then invested a bit in sort of design work, still terrible packaging, but slightly less terrible. And then just slowly sort of iterated it, and it was all, yeah, this is just the approach I took. It's not said it's the best approach, just the approach I took. Because I was also quite conscious that if this is going to work, then I need to take my time to build it out. I need to really understand like the process, what customers want. You're running a business, there's so many elements that aren't there. So I really wanted to be deliberate about what I was doing rather than kind of jump in full hog
Mm.
and everything else. But yeah, we sort of tested and evolved. I then sort of rented a kitchen up in Yorkshire where they had a drying place nearby, and then just I was there for 3 days. I think I cooked about 1,000 meals or something.
Wow.
That kind of broke me nearly, especially when I sort of chopped the end of my finger off
Oof.
at sort of 8 o'clock at night and still had a whole lot more cooking to do. Luckily, I knew where the end of the finger went, so we didn't get anywhere near any of the meals. Found some manufacturers to work with, but by that point, I knew the product really well. I knew the process, although for small scale, so like I had a bit of understanding about how we could then scale this up. Found the manufacturers who could put in great quality ingredients, really wholesome, natural, good quality ingredients with proper flavors, and then we sort of just grew it from there. And now it's just figuring out the right channels to play in. How do we actually we're still very much in the start phase. I said like the 0 to 100k start phase,
Mm.
then hopefully progress to the growth phase when we're sort of 100 to a million, and then scale phase 1 million plus. But I sort of like to bracket it in those phases to be realistic about, okay, that this is where we are now, and this is the things I need to be doing. Very much like the hustle. It's probably now less process, more hustle.
What I love about the story and is that you found a thread and you just pulled on it and you
Mm,
just kept pulling on it and obviously there's a level of passion there of interest given the personal relation and trying to feed your lovely sons, but it's also that you found something that you can really see working, and you did the market research and kept getting market feedback. I know there's probably people who are marketing experts and people who are business experts writing down this business plan that you've created. I imagine you didn't write a business plan, you kind of just got on with it, or did you actually have something written?
when I raised a bit of money last year, I put together a business plan
Oh, there we go.
together, and then quite quickly found a business plan is not, whilst okay, some of those assumptions we needed to test, and we've
Mm.
tested them, and so we've pivoted to other things. But yeah, but at the start, I didn't really have a business plan. I had just a general idea of like, even my pricing was way out. I didn't really understand pricing. I didn't understand so many things, but it was just like, because I think for me anyway, it's like, is there a legitimate problem, and have you got a legitimate solution for that
Mm.
problem? And then it's figuring out, okay, is it scalable? Is it commercially viable and everything else? But fundamental at the core center of any business surely has to be, is there a problem, and is your solution good enough to fit that problem?
There's always one thing that comes to mind because we get a lot of people actually come to us and go, "Can you please write us a business plan for you?" And I go, "Hold up. Before you spend money with us and we
Yeah.
spend hours going over this business plan, what are you actually trying to do here?" And if they can't articulate the story that you've just mentioned, don't need to start there. But what I do start with, and everyone, please, if you're going to even think about start a business, do this. Download something called the Business Canvas. It's completely free,
Okay.
and you can download it, I think, in A4 or maybe even A3 version. Stick it on your wall and fill that in. And
Mm,
the Business Canvas just has a handful of sections on there which identifies a problem, identifies a solution, identifies your key target market, identifies your key suppliers, how you're going to make money. It just touches on everything. You fill the canvas in with one section, with one sentence in each section.
mhm,
If you can't do that, you don't have an idea,
mm.
and you can do that in half a day.
Yep.
You don't have to spend hours and hours and hours and days writing a formal business plan. Truth be told, I was in the private equity industry. We didn't really read the business plan. We read the people,
Mm,
because if the people couldn't articulate their story, there's no point even reading the business plan. That
mm,
doesn't make sense.
mm,
So thank you for sharing that, because
mm.
I think I'm hoping people, specifically if they're trying to build a product based business, that's the process you go down, because getting feedback from the market is ultimate. And the person that probably told you this was a rubbish recipe, you probably hugged them. I hope you did, with both hands. I went, thank you very much. This is actually rubbish. I'm going to go away and make it better. And when that person signed off and said that was a better recipe, a better product,
Mm.
that made your business better.
Yeah, no, for sure. And I think there's obviously different having a sort of customer feedback is fundamental to all of this. And I think I always say, like, be honest. Like, I can take it. Like, I don't want any glossy whatever. Just be completely honest with me about what you think about it. Because then you get the unvarnished truth. And now you got to obviously you need to be a bit careful because some might say, "Oh, it tastes great." Like, I don't know, we've got a bolognese coming out. It's like someone said, "Oh, we need it more meaty," or someone's saying, "Oh, we need," or it's no, it's perfect. Someone said, "We want softer pasta." Someone said the pasta's perfect. So you got to be, but you need to get enough information back
Mm.
than realizing it. But it's you've got to get that customer feedback
Oh
throughout. And I think there's interesting stories I've heard of business owners with a product-based business with turnover billions, and the owner will still like talk to the end customer to find out, are you happy with our
yeah.
product?
Oh yeah.
And that feedback loop is essential. And now, sort of on a monthly basis, I'll message all the previous month's customers and try and get feedback that way, as well as putting out ad hoc surveys and everything else. So, um, but also just starting is a really good way. Just I was like,
Yeah.
I'll get a stand on Kingston High Street if anyone's going to buy it. Well, that's some validation right there. Are they going to buy
Mm.
it again? Well, that's an even bigger test.
Yeah. And
Yeah,
that's if you don't mind me saying it,
go
that's
for it.
your resilience coming through because there's so many people I've spoken to where they've designed something, designed a product or a service, they've delivered that, and someone's given them some feedback, and they've gone, oh well, that's it, I'm done now. You
Yeah,
know, I've failed. They don't find that feedback actually enlightening, and actually it's useful. I much prefer. Maybe not all the time, but the negative feedback because then it means you can go away and improve it. And that process of going away and improving it is actually resilience because you're taking on that feedback. You're not taking it in a sort of personal manner. You're taking it as okay. Well, this is just something that's happened with the product.
don't get me wrong. I hit
So
sometimes when I normally I'm like, oh my god, I feel awful. Have a
yeah,
really low moment, and then sort of dust myself off and like, okay, fine, I'll take it on board. What we're going to do to resolve that? But yeah, so it's like sales as well. And you go, I used to beginning of this year, I had my little hit list of like 20 shops I'll go and visit on a day. Convert two, maybe if you're lucky.
yeah,
Like just getting no, no, we're not interested. No, we're not interested. No. But I think there comes a time where you just sort of then you're sort of used to it because I never expect to say no, and then so if we get a plus, like, amazing.
yeah,
Well, this is really positive. But also you change your pitch and you sort of learn in that process. So you've
yeah,
definitely got to just roll with it
yeah.
and just keep learning.
You had very early success as a 16-year-old going into one of the most prestigious military colleges in the world. That's and you're a very humble man, Ed. But I've got to do
When you see it from
something.
the inside, it might be different. But yeah, no, yeah,
But
maintain the
but
pretense.
but
Yeah.
that is phenomenal. Of course, getting a university degree very challenging. Got to crack on, have an element of discipline there. And then spending several years within the army, reaching major. You've had a lot of early success, and then you go to business ownership, and sometimes it's almost early failure because it's just constant no's and constant. Is it? Did you find that juxtaposition where you're kind of going, I'm used to things going quite well here, and you've hit some bumps along the way on the business side, as every business owner does? Or did you go, do you know what? Actually, the army's completely different. We do experience failure quite a lot, and this is how we were taught to deal with it. And I took those skill sets into business ownership.
I think there's a few things in that, right? To be fair, I think one is how do I define success, and I think I set probably just a naively high bar for what success is. Whereas ultimately, in many respects, success is now like I've got two wonderful kids, I've got a lovely, a brilliant wife, got a happy family. Like that is success in many respects. I'm trying to remind myself just to be grateful for what you've got right now. I'll say to anybody who's thinking about this sort of path in life, go into it with your eyes wide open.
Mm,
I think it's really interesting. I'm not a natural entrepreneur. I wasn't selling sweets in the playground. I'm not like an Alan Sugar type guy. Like, I'm not particularly motivated by money,
mm,
or have an intrinsic sort of appreciation of um, how to make money. But I'm pretty clear. Yeah, as much as I care about toddler food and the health of this nation isn't in a great place, and trying to do my own very very limited way is a massive
mm,
problem. But just trying to do something positive rather than negative. Um, that's one motivation, but it goes a lot deeper than that as well. So I think I'm very clear in terms of what my ultimate motivation is
mm,
for this, and that is tested on a pretty much a daily basis. So I would suggest to anybody, and everybody's different, but be very clear about why it is you're doing what you're doing. Now, if you want to make the world's biggest business and have all the ego that goes with that
mm,
and the fame, then brilliant. That might be what you want. Fantastic, go for it. If you want to make a whole load, shed load of money, then brilliant, go and do that. Um, but I remember listening to somebody, Papa Mooch, a pet food business, And I can't remember the name of
Awesome.
this theory, but there's a theory where if you are knocking on death's door, looking back at your life, what is it? Well, like, what is the story that you want to tell? And so he sort of framed it in that regard, and that sort of quite resonated with the way I look at it as well. So
Mm,
um, I think it's being very clear about what it is you want to achieve and why. What are your values that underpin that? Because I think you need to be able to look the guy in the mirror and be like, I've given it my best shot. I've done it in the right way, and I'm happy
mm,
with the decision I've taken and the reasons why I've taken those decisions. Because you do get tested on your values, I think.
absolutely.
And so if you haven't got your values, then how are you making decisions?
When you are going through that time where it's a bit challenging, do you talk to yourself in that way? Do you have like that internal positive, voice that goes, no, I'm gonna one foot in front of the other, I'm just gonna move forward and get on with it? Or is it something that you just do?
I think it's the internal voice, to be fair, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I've always, I don't know why, I don't really know why it is, but I even talk to myself out loud, a bit weird. But
No,
when
no,
it's sat in your office by yourself, you're like, okay.
I do it all the
Um,
time, and the wife gets very worried because it's in
yeah,
the bathroom as well. So sometimes
yeah.
it's just, you're brushing your teeth and you're going like, "Come on, get
But
on
no,
with it," and,
yeah.
you
I
know,
mean, because she's been working when she works from home 1 day a week, and we're sharing the office. Then I was like, Ed, what are you doing? Like, get grip. And then she's like, why are you talking to yourself like that? But no, there is that internal dialogue because
mm,
I have no idea where this comes from. Maybe something might bring, who knows? But it's like dust stuff off. Like I'm always having that battle. There's like the two little guys on my shoulder, like do this,
mm.
don't do that, whatever. And I do talk to my. Oh god, this sounds very weird.
Not at all. I'm the
Maybe I've been
same
spending
boat as
too long
you.
by myself, but I'm just going to go to a shrink. But there is that dialogue of
Mm,
just don't worry about it. It's fine. Everything's okay. Just chill out because I do
yeah,
put quite a lot of pressure on myself. Just it's okay. Like keep
yeah,
dust yourself. Or actually, no. Look, get a grip. You need to send this email, or you need to do this particular boring task. You're probably going to get a no, but if you don't do it, then you never get a no. So get on and do it. And you've told yourself you're going to do it, so do it. So there is that guy
mm.
who's sort of like the sergeant major gripping me from behind,
Oh, yeah.
telling me
Oh,
what to
yeah.
do. So
I say this to myself a lot, and when I work with clients, sometimes even though I'm an accountant, I'm talking about
mm,
accounts and tax and all this kind of stuff. Um, a lot of what I do is actually on the sort of business coaching side because it is the motivational bit, kind of like why I'm doing this podcast.
mm,
The big element is that you've got to talk positively to yourself. And sometimes when clients are talking to me about, oh, I messed this up, or I'd sent that email late, or there's a typo in this contract and it's creating an issue now. And it's like, okay, these are serious points, obviously. But at the same time, if you're talking negatively to yourself, um, that's kind of the energy you're putting out there. But also, it's how are you actually getting stuff done then?
mm,
So I always say to people, look, even if find some way to get up in the morning, look yourself in the mirror, and say something to yourself. Some people have little mantras. If you were to speak to a lot of like lifestyle or business coaches, they will have their own ways of doing things. But ultimately, and Ed Hill taught me this actually, who was one of the early episodes, a former Royal Marine sniper commander. He used to say to me even throughout the episode, actually, say to me all the time, right? Sometimes I've got to get up in front of my mirror, maybe slap myself a couple of times, just get on with the day. And very often that did mean actually going for that morning exercise, just get the body moving, get the heavy breath going, maybe get a bit sweaty and just feel alive a little bit. And then it's deal with the biggest problem you've got first. Just deal with it. Just get on, send that email,
mm,
send that report, whatever it is, just do it. And then by the time you've done that, you realize actually you've still got the rest of the bloody day to do stuff.
mm, mm.
So I'm glad to hear that it's an active motion. It's not something that you just kind of get on and deal with. It's something that you're constantly talking to yourself every day. So thank you for sharing that.
No,
But
that's okay. Yeah, I think that you mentioned an interesting point there in terms of kindness.
yeah, yeah,
Historically, I've not been the kindest person to myself, and I think over the last, I've been doing this now full time for all of us 6 months. But yeah, first 2 months this year, not very kind to myself. Beginning of Q2, probably a bit harsh on myself, and
mm,
then I think over the last month, I've sort of like, do you know what? Just chill out.
mm,
And so we sort of mentioned earlier perspective.
mm,
Obviously I'm putting like my whole everything into this, but there is a part of me that's like, look, mate, if it doesn't work, it doesn't work. At least you're kind of giving it your best shot.
yeah,
And there's a reason why 90% of businesses fail in 5 years or whatever it is, because it's unbelievably tough to get this working.
yeah,
So just chill out and enjoy it, and just take that slight bit of pressure off your obviously if it doesn't work, I'll be distraught, but trying to be kinder to myself and just, you're doing okay. Like,
mm,
and things you don't know, there's a reason why I don't know it, because you're new to all this. So just learn from your mistakes. Try and preempt these mistakes by going onto YouTube or doing whatever it is to try and do a bit
Mm.
of self education. But yeah, trying to be kind to yourself, because I did find that when I was being unkind to myself, like the headspace was on a little quite a quick spiral downhill. So
It
which isn't
is.
good for anybody. And then you take it home. Well, I'm at home anyway, but you then sort of take found I was just not being as good a parent or husband as I needed to be. So
I really resonate with that because I think there is that fine balance between being kind to yourself and going, look, this is okay. Well, be fine. You don't have to beat yourself up so much about this one small thing that happened, but also maintaining high standards. And
yeah,
I
for
think
sure.
sometimes it's kind of a slippery slope because
Mm,
I think people think, well, if you let that slip, then everything's going to fall apart. Whereas we kind of know, okay, it's a slippery slope, but you still can't stop yourself. It's not
mm.
it's not you're not going to go all the way down to the bottom. And it's about maintaining a high standards and ensuring that if you did say you'll do something by that date, you do everything in your power to get it done by that date. But at the same time, if you didn't because something external existential happened, something you couldn't control, let's say a delivery of your product was going, but there was a massive war in the Middle East and nothing's going through and deliveries are challenging. You can kind of go, well, then what do I need to do to deal with that? It's not my fault. It's just something I need to deal with.
Yeah, I think there's two sort of examples of that really. One is a small example, but we're recording this on a Thursday. I send out an email newsletter every other Thursday. Normally, I'll write it about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. For today, because school holidays, up here doing this, I haven't got the time to do it, so I'll be doing that about 8 o'clock tonight, just to make sure I get that done. And our open rate, I'm trying to build that sort of community with it, so it's important that I don't miss that timeline.
Mm,
Another example, the orders at Ocado started ramping up, and we're getting sort of supply chain issues because it has to go through a third party, and they were sort of swamped. And so I was like, I've got big delivery. I'm going to take it directly to them. I'm going to have a chat with the person who manages it, find out
mm,
what's happening there. So I've got so much information that way, and it's like, hey, I know some of this out of my control, but what can I do? Well, I can build a relationship with this person.
mm,
I can improve my labeling just to make it even clearer to the people, to the guys in the warehouse. Which of my parcels, where are they going, um, and sort of take that forward. So rather than just, oh, there's nothing I can do about this, it's someone else's fault. It's okay.
mm,
Just take it as far as you can. What is in my control, rather than just complaining about it. It's like, what can you do now? If it's completely outside of your control, there's nothing to do about it. Let's say
mm,
macro government forces or whatever, like whatever. Yeah, Andy Burnham's now going to do to business rates. Like,
mm,
there's literally nothing I can do about that. So try not to worry about it. If there is risk that's being presented to you that might be building, let's say, you know, um, what's going on in the Strait of Hormuz is raising energy price in the UK. There's now a surcharge on our drying. That's now been brought in because of the increased energy rates, and because how volatile they are. So now my cost of goods is going up. Okay, so how do I now manage that? Well, can I find some efficiencies? Can I take a bit less margin or whatever it is? So it's always about thinking about, or what can I actually do? Just take ownership
mm.
over things you can control. Try not to sweat the things you can't control, because it's just distracting and pointless.
Yeah, control the controllables. Yeah, it's
Mm.
just it's just all you got to do every day, and fair play. And speaking of which, you're sort of, um, I guess that's almost sort of why you had that kind of Somalia moment, moved over into business ownership to be closer to your family, um, which any person can respect, any person can. Um, have you achieved that? You've left the army, you're running a business. It's difficult, as you say. You're sort of trying to get it off the ground. It's one of the hardest things to do. You're out every day, no doubt, pitching or sitting at your desk running emails and newsletters and all the rest of it. Have you achieved that bit where you've got more time with your family?
Yeah, yeah. To be fair, I think I'm not. If I looked at what my military career would look like for the next sort of 4 to 6 years after I left, then it'll be changing job every 2 years, which means changing housing. What does that mean for our kids' education? What does that mean for my wife's work? I'll be away quite a lot overseas doing stuff, or even within the UK. So yeah, I'm definitely see the kids more. I can do the pickups. I can do the drop offs. From a headspace perspective, it's difficult to say really, but I think I'm definitely more distracted. I think I'm finding it difficult at the moment to be as present as I want to be with the family, because there's always just something on the back of my mind. There's the insecurity that I'm not doing enough, like we're too small, we're not growing
Mm.
quick enough, I haven't done this, I haven't done that, I've done that. So trying to be more present is something I'm working on, but I think we've still got a wee way to go yet. But I'm also conscious that as things do start ramping up, we're in the start phase, we do get into the growth phase.
Mm.
We've got, more accounts open, we're more production runs going through, like everything gets more complex. I think my time is going to be even more pulled in different directions.
Yeah.
So then it's being resolute about, okay, so why am I doing this?
Yeah.
And trying to carve out the time to be able to, um, be more with the family. But I think, fundamentally, yes, I'm a lot closer to home than I've ever been. And that was one of the reasons why I'm doing
Yeah.
it. But equally, as I do things do grow up, one of the beauties, like the true privileges of running a business, you've got freedom to make your own decisions for the most part. Because there's a slight lack of freedom because the business also has its requirements you've got to feed. So it's not completely exclusive, but it's still down to you. It's
Mm.
I want to go and do a podcast today. I'm going to go and do a podcast today. I'm going to take Harry with me. No one's going to tell me what to do. It's all my own decisions, really. And there's a balance with everything in life, isn't there?
Yeah.
I just think I'm very fortunate ultimately. So,
Yeah. Yeah. And was there anything, I mean, if you don't mind me saying it, you come across very measured, very calm, to like put you in any
like a
situation
duck
and
underwater,
yeah,
flapping the
just
little legs and like going crazy. But yeah.
but is there anything that that you have come across in your business ownership kind of career so far where you thought I did not expect that at all. I don't know how to deal with it.
Well, that's a good question. I think one of the headaches I've got at the moment is money. Very obvious thing to state.
Yeah.
How much money do you need to get a food business, particularly off the ground successfully? Now we raised a little bit of pre-seed capital, which I needed to do to. I'd left the army, went to Amazon for about a year, and then to leave Amazon, I needed capital to be able to pay myself a wage to cover childcare and mortgage costs, and give us our minimum order quantity is quite high, so we needed capital to be able to put the order through. Um, but it's like, how much money do you actually need? You watch Dragon's Den, or I talk to other people within the food world, and like how much money they've raised if they're turning a profit. So that's always in the back of my mind. Like, actually, like bloody hell, like there's a frozen baby and toddler and kids brand that's just raised 2 million quid. Like bloody hell, is that how much money you need
Yeah.
to do this? I mean, admittedly that's their Series A, and they're 5 years down the road, so well ahead of me. But because I'm also just, how do you create a sustainable business model? Like the three things that I'm really after with this business is for it to be respected
Mm.
from across the industry, that we're doing, we're not compromising on the quality of our food. They're real ingredients, proper food that's in line with like NHS guidelines and others
Mm.
to support toddler development. It's profitable, so we're sustainable. And we're accessible. And I think that accessibility is probably going to be the most tricky element to get right. Like we're a premium product with a premium price tag,
Mm.
so therefore, there's only a certain sort of customer demographic that can afford to do it. So I've got ideas, just ideas at the moment about how I want sort of a slightly more sort of charitable arm and everything else to the business. But underpinning all of that is like, how much capital do you need to actually
Yeah.
get this going? And I think in my mind, I'm sort of comfortable with take less money, and it really forces you to think things through and be very frugal and deliberate about your decisions. And if that comes at the cost of sort of pace in the early stages, I think
Mm.
that's okay, because I think that pace and that will come later. And I think it means you've got stronger foundations in place. But I haven't done this before, so I'm still trying to, like, that's my assumption.
Yeah.
Like all good business assumptions, it needs to be tested in combat,
Mm.
and see whether
Yeah.
it's right or wrong. But I guess that's probably the thing that's I'm grappling with most is the capital requirements to make a sustainable, profitable food business.
You mentioned before how you're not motivated by money, which I think is actually a very common thing I hear from a lot of clients, from a lot of business owners. Um, but that doesn't actually mean you're not engaged with finances. And I think I want to really pull those concepts apart, because I think
Mm,
people say, well, I'm not motivated by money, but then they don't actually think about it then. They just kind of go, this will work somehow. But the somehow never works, because the thing you have to be very conscious of with the lifeblood of the business is cash flow.
mm,
And you've got to understand where the money's coming from, where it's going to go out to, and if you've raised funds, what exactly you're going to spend it on. You don't necessarily have to be motivated by money, but you always have to be engaged with your finances, and especially when you're starting up, because and feel free to share as much as you wish.
mm,
But you mentioned sort of mortgage costs and childcare. These are very real things, and you've got to look after your personal life. And no doubt you've gone from steady paycheck in the army, whatever size it is, and a few other roles, to then this sort of unexpected world of well, can I actually take a bit of money out this month, and can I pay myself, and that will help towards a mortgage cost. And of course, your lovely wife is probably supporting, in other ways.
Mm.
She's got a role as well, right? Oh, a
In
job as
for,
well.
yeah, so she's got a full-time role, yeah. So she's
Oh,
funding the house. She's primarily, I'm covering the bare basics, but
yeah,
yeah, she's now had to increase her work to fund
yeah,
the lack of salary that I'm now getting.
yeah.
So
Which means, pooling responsibilities,
mm,
in the household, spending time with children throughout the work day. So these are really real points, but it all comes because you are engaged with your finances clearly. So I wanted to pull that separately. Um, what do you think about sort of how you've approached the finances? Have you thought, is this something active that you've taught yourself, or is it just something you need to get to grips with? So you just sat down and went, right, we've got to do this, and this is how we're going to do it.
so I'm super lucky because I've got a an ex-army friend of mine who left the army before I did. He then went to BCG, Boston Consulting Group, and he was a brilliant consultant. And then he left after a few years, and now he's broadly speaking like the chief operations officer for a quite quickly growing fintech
Mm,
scale up. He is a business mind through and through, and so he's he's been supporting me for a year. And honestly, like you talk about naivety, like genuinely, like this is on a staggering how naive I am to most of these things. But he was like, "You need a cash flow forecast. Here is an indicative cash flow forecast. Use that every month. I have a meeting with him plus another close advisor of mine, and I'll put together the cash position. You know, it's probably not like the most financially pure model, but it's enough. So this is the cash that's come in this month. This is the cash
mm,
that's going out, and then underpin that, we then have our forecast. All right, this is what we now perceive over the next sort of 6 to 12 months, and I'll update that monthly. You know, business fundamentally as a function is to make money. So if you don't understand money, you don't need to be. And I'm not the most financially literate, but a lot of that just come through education, time, and being just painfully aware that that is the lifeblood of your business. If you haven't got any money, you haven't got a business. So now, obviously, like there is, you know, I want financial freedom. That's part of the reason for doing it, but it's not
mm,
the end goal of this. It's more about it's about the satisfaction, I guess. So that sort of the overstated Maslow's hierarchy of needs, which you hear about, which in the army, but that sort of top pillar of self actualization,
mm,
where you're just completely content in what you've achieved and what and why you've done it. And I think it's that sort of aspirational sort of pillar that I'm trying to get to.
mm,
And then it gives me, if I get the financial freedom, nothing crazy at all, but just enough to go on like a nice holiday with the kids, repay the wife, to have a bit more autonomy over your decision. You're not beholden to or constrained, I guess, by your expenses. But to then get after like actually get into a lot more of the meatier, public health stuff to do with feeding kids, whether that's working with like central government, local government, charities, whatever. That's the
mm,
stuff that I really sort of want to get after. And I think that comes. I can do some of that in the business, but I think it's different. But I think it's earning the understanding. The industry is one of those stakeholders in public health. Getting the credibility, hopefully, through a successful business, and then having the network as well that I can then apply it to good use on the other side. So I think,
mm,
whilst I'm motivated by trying to make this a successful venture and having some financial end as a result.
mm.
The true motivation goes another step beyond that.
Yeah,
So I think I would encourage people who do want to get into business to think about what is it that success looks like. What is the reason why? What's that motivation? And money, by all means, like definitely people deserve to live a good life, and you've got money in the bank to be able to do it, and as long as you
absolutely.
spend it in the right way, then or whatever you perceive to be the right way, then brilliant. It's not a negative at all, but it's just being very clear and resolute about, right, what is it that's driving you. I think is super important.
It might surprise people to hear that probably most clients that I deal with, it may be just my client set, but most of them are money motivated.
Mm,
They come up with they've had a great career in whatever they're doing. They come up with a bit of an idea, and they try and find a way to transition into the business. But the idea for the business is freedom and more money, because they go, well, I've capped out on sort of my salary where I'm at. If I really need to punch through and get to senior management or board levels of whatever career I'm in, I need to really put in some hustle. If I'm going to take all that effort, I might as well put it in myself, and
mm,
I probably will earn more, and I'm in more control.
mm,
So why wouldn't I do that? And just to manage the transition, I'll just work on the business and my outside time. That's a very, very common sort of business owner we come across. And and that's absolutely fine. I just say, look, this is part of why you're doing it. But ultimately, when you really kind of scratch beneath the surface. A lot of it is, well, if I had more resource, then I would be able to set up a charitable arm, or I would be able
Mm.
to give a bit more to these people, or I would be able to help others. And you find that once people have probably punched through maybe some of what Maslow's talking about, his the hierarchy of needs, actually you find people are quite giving
Mm.
after some time. And I've got plenty of clients that I've got one client where they've got 25 restaurants all over the UK, and they charge 50p per sort of receipt. Take that money and put it into a charitable
Mm.
foundation, and you can imagine the number of transactions they go through every day. So it
Mm.
ends up being quite a substantial amount of money, and they
Mm.
just just gift it to a charity that they choose. They've got a local, a sort of nationwide and international charity they pick every
Mm.
month. Just donate a
Yeah,
portion
brilliant.
of funds to that, and that's it. Very
Mm.
simple, very elegant, but a focus that business owners have had.
Yeah.
And I think it's incredible. And I think you should give back as much as you can. If you can't give back financially, then give back through, the lessons that you've learned and some of the wisdom you potentially have accumulated along the way. And, if it guides someone out of making a mistake and put them in the right way. So,
100%. I think it goes back to that point in terms of, you're knocking on death's door, you're
yeah.
looking back, you're like, have I actually given? Like, brilliant. I've died a super rich man. I've hoarded all my wealth. Fantastic, good for you. But
Mm.
like, what about all the other guys who could do with a little helping hand back there? You could have made a massive difference with. So,
Oh,
but
absolutely.
each their own. But I do think you look at like difficult. I just want to make maybe it's an unfair point, but it might be perceived in today's society that actually hoarding wealth is more common than
Mm,
being philanthropic, and just the levels of wealth that are accumulated by some quarters.
mm.
Now, it's perception. There's a danger between perception and reality, but it does seem that the levels of wealth that are being hoarded are just crazy money. And I get like, good for you, fine, but what about that sort of old school principle of make money and then spread it and share your wealth accordingly?
Oh, absolutely. And I think one of the biggest topics right now well, if you follow the channel or follow Rohit the accountant, you'll see that we talk a lot about a wealth tax and the concept of wealth tax, and we'll be talking more and more about it because there's a few characters out there that are pushing this up the agenda. And Gary Stevenson and Gary's Economics, he's pushing that quite hard. And whether you agree with him or not is a separate point. But I appreciate him talking about it. I disagree with him, but I
Mm.
appreciate him talking about it. And I think it is important to look at the accumulation of wealth and actually how has it been accumulated. And there's so many arguments around it. Around if you're accumulating wealth, potentially you're taking wealth from other people. So how are you managing resources in from a societal basis? What I can share, certainly the wealthier clients we manage, the wealthier they become, the more generous they
Mm.
are, and that's without a shadow of a doubt. I can say that to the T.
Mm-hmm.
There's a direct correlation because the causation is that once you've accumulated a level of resource, you do start looking at helping others. And very often it starts off with friends and family, just helping out with a bit of money. Maybe
Mm.
they're starting a business and they want to give them a bit of change. And then it moves up into more structure and more purpose and potentially even charities and foundations and all the rest of it. Um, but it's I think it's very rare to find someone who has accumulated a large amount of wealth that isn't also giving. I think perhaps the contention is, um, well, how are they giving, to what level, and of course taxation, which
Mm.
ultimately is managed by a centralized force, i.e., a government, who then gives it to how society is picking for those funds to be given to based on the manifesto of the government of the day. But I think fundamentally, people and myself included, want to try to accumulate wealth, obviously to secure themselves and become financially free and do all those kind of things, but also to help others. And I think the more people that can have that kind of mindset where they're helping others, I think I really believe in and passionately believe in the power of small and medium sized businesses. I
Mm-hmm.
think
Mm-hmm.
they are the most generous, they are the most kind, they are the best businesses in the world to help, particularly local people. For example, give someone a job.
Mm-hmm.
Just they're perhaps maybe a younger person. No one's given them a break. They've applied to hundreds of jobs to faceless corporations, and they're just finding it tough. Well, what about a local businessman that needs someone just to work as a labourer for a day?
Mm.
Just to get them out of the house, be active, be part of a group of people to achieve a small goal that day, and of course earn a bit of cash out of it or money out of it. I think that's invaluable. And I think the more people that have those structures and are able to help from a purity perspective, of course, there's other things and structure to think about. I think that will go so much further.
Yeah, to be honest, my frustration at the moment is that a lot of the dialogue around or conversations in public with I don't want to make this a political sort of conversation,
Mm,
but it seems to be slightly sort of politics of envy, like the
mm,
haves and the have-nots. It seems slightly anti-business, although there's words to say that they're pro-business, but then some of the actions I would suggest would go against being pro-business, and it just seems a bit about these guys got loads of money, business got loads of money, and these are people that haven't got money. But it's like, what about actually the social good that comes with business? Now we live in a capitalist society. Different ways you can run your societies, but ultimately
mm,
we've sort of over history realized that this is probably the best way. Yes, it leads, it's not all perfect, but there's some other ways you can do it which probably have more imperfections.
mm,
So this is the least worst option. So um but there is so much good that can come of it, and just having that sort of financial security to then get after some of the stuff that you really do care about.
mm.
And you've got that fortunate position to have the money to be able to, and freedom to be able to then do it
Yeah,
is so valuable. I just It just seems like a lot of the narrative at the moment in today's world is just based on envy and
yeah. No, it's tough, and
belief. So
I think what I would cite, and for full disclosure to the audience, we didn't know that this conversation would go down this
no, it
route.
wasn't on the list, was it?
It was not on the
No,
crib sheet.
yeah.
So for full disclosure, but earlier in the episode, you mentioned and talked about profit from a sustainability
Mm,
perspective. For me, that's actually how the most successful people talk about profit. It's not a function of, well, then I get to take that home and spend it on my whatever. It's actually with a view of, well, I need to make this whole system sustainable, because if I want to get to a position, maybe when we talk in 3 years' time, when you've got tens of employees and you've got overheads and you've got people really relying on your product to feed their children. I mean, that's a huge deal. It's a
mm,
huge amount of responsibility. Um, but if you and your potentially fellow business partners or board of directors or whatever level we get to mismanage the company, all that falls apart.
mm,
Jobs fail, and all the people that you work within your supply chain and community and network all lose out on income. From that perspective, um, when we look at profit, we talk about sustainability because it makes the system work.
mm,
And when it works, then you've got more resource to invest back into the system, to build it better, to create more jobs. And I think profit sometimes has a sort of pejorative,
mm,
element to it. And I want people to say, well, look, there are some people that probably talk about it like that. Fine. But the best people amongst us, the best business owners, the best people probably to look at as quote unquote models and idols are the ones that talk about profit from a sustainability perspective, because they know they can keep the show running. They know that cash flow will be there, then they can create more jobs, and then they can build a better community. And I think there's a level of uncomfortability because the people that sit behind that profit,
mm,
potentially could be just yourself, and your partner, of course, um, just behind the whole business. And you might accumulate a significant amount of wealth by making good quality decisions and building a very profitable business. Um, but then the question becomes, well, who are you, and what are your values?
mm,
And you have all this resource. Are you going to be spending it in the right way? But then the contention is, well, hang on a second, that's mine. I can choose how I should be able
mm.
to do that. So I think all those conversations are such a difficult thing to manage.
But I think there
Um,
should be Deborah Meaden. I've sort of read it in her book. To be fair, Deborah Meaden's fairly sort of clear on it. Is like we all can feel a bit. There's a bit of like a stigma around talking about money, but ultimately you need to generate profit to have a business to then do all these things. And yeah, someone might go and buy a supercar. Great,
yeah,
good for them. Like they've worked bloody hard and they've made some money. But that's not like the end, is it? It's about creating that sustainable business that does give people jobs, that does provide value to broader than just your immediate sort of value. It's across the wider chain. So um, you got to get that profit going. Now, how do you do that? That's how I
yeah.
get the fish. But
That's
yeah,
another episode, Ed.
yeah, that's a whole other thing. Yeah, and it's like perception versus reality. I could talk about it, but the reality is a bit different. So
Always. And I can't thank you enough for your time. I really, really appreciated it. And um, I'm really hoping the audience has got some real strong flavors of how to create a business, and pull together a good quality business idea. If they're stuck, definitely listen to Ed's story. We're going to cut that little bit out about how you pulled on that thread and created More Toddler Meals. And and just your frankness and your openness. I really respect and appreciate it, and we look for that in all of our guests, and long may that continue. So thank you, Ed. But as I just told you a few hours ago, we have a final question that we ask all of our guests, and that question is: if your 18-year-old self had a conversation with your 80-year-old self, what would that conversation be about?
That's the one question I was dreading the most, I think.
It's always coming.
Oh, I think probably set some context. So as an 18-year-old, what was I up to? Oh, again, I was quite a serious guy,
Mm,
pretty insecure, quite determined, very much an introvert, probably still am. So I think based on all of that, if 80-year-old Ed is out there probably hobbling around, having just ruined his knees from running around too much and too many parachute falls, he's probably going to be like, look, Ed, just chill out. Like, actually, the most important thing is have a laugh, have some fun, but underpin all of that, try and achieve your potential. Because I think there's nothing, I know in my mind anyway, I'm like, there's nothing worse than not achieving your potential to a degree. It depends on what that's quite a big, your potential could be, it's quite difficult to sort of define exactly what it is. But
mm,
well, I guess maybe actually, me and my wife, we think about how we want to raise our own kids is be kind, be confident, um, and have fun. I think it's probably the three things. So I guess it's probably those things actually. Just be kind to other people you meet, and then everything you try and be kind as best you can. Be
mm,
confident in your own abilities, but have a laugh, have some fun with it as well. Because there's when you set your mind, when you're release some of those constraints in your mind, it's
mm.
just have a good crack. Like it's
Absolutely, and I think kindness is such an underrated skill,
mm,
and I think it requires a lot of patience, and especially when there's things flying around and things go well. Some things don't go so well, but if you have that kind nature to you, I do believe that, especially as a business owner and leader, you become more approachable, and I think that's absolutely fundamental to what needs to be done because then you can deal with more things. Um, as well as of course just be someone that's great to work with, and
mm,
and not throwing temper tantrums or being emotional or any of that. We can just manage matters. And I really enjoy your point, and you mentioned it a few times actually, which I'm really happy about, which is the sort of sense of humor, however dark or whatever version it comes in. And I remember a long time ago, and I was at school, and the headmaster was in this lesson for some reason, and we were all backs a little bit straighter and a little bit more sort of less sort of raucous. But um, the teacher ran around the whole class and went, "What do you think the most important skill in life is?" And as a 12-year-old, obviously a bit like, I don't know what the hell I'm going to say
mm.
here, but everyone kind of said the usual things, discipline or accountability, or kind of what you'd think, a normal answer would be. And the headmaster said a sense of humor.
Mm.
And we all looked at him and went, "What? You're like the strictest guy we've
Yeah,
ever met. How are you saying this?" And I'm so glad I learned that at such a young age. So thank you, Stephen Wright, for that. He just taught us that, don't take everything so seriously. Exams will come and go at that time. Things come and go. It's okay. But if you can enjoy yourself whilst doing it, then I think you've cracked most of that. The element of life.
but
But
that's it. I
but
can
look,
imagine just being that serious all your time. Oh god, it would be exhausting, wouldn't it? You just need to have, but yeah, as long as it's underpinned by just determination, drive, and everything else. But just have a crack. Um,
absolutely, Ed. What a pleasure. Thank you
and
very
you're
much
right.
for your
Honestly,
time.
thanks so much for having me on.
No,
It's
absolutely.
been a blast.